My name is Nadia Marsh. Please help me.
Before we begin, if you're enjoying these law enforcement stories, please take a moment to subscribe and hit that like button. It helps us bring you more of these accounts from the darkest corners of American policing. And drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from tonight. Now, let's talk about something that still keeps me awake at night. I am Rebecca Marsh, and I served as sheriff of Millbrook County, Wyoming, for over 8 years before resigning. Most people in town think I resigned because of stress-related incidents involving my deputy, or because I could no longer handle the job. Let them think that. The truth is much stranger and harder to explain, which is why I learned the necessity of keeping it to myself. But every year on November 14th, I think about the calls. The impossible calls that came through my dispatch in the fall of 1993. And I wonder if I made the right choice. I wonder if I even had a choice at all. Let me start at the beginning. I became sheriff in 1991, at 32 years old, which made me one of the youngest sheriffs in Wyoming and one of maybe a dozen female sheriffs in the entire country. Millbrook County wasn't a big job, population just under 3,000, spread across hundreds of square miles of high plains and scrubland. Most of my work was responding to traffic accidents, dealing with the occasional drunk and disorderly, and making sure the ranchers didn't shoot each other over water rights. It was quiet work, lonely work. But it was mine. I'd grown up in Millbrook, left for college and the police academy, then came back when the sheriff position opened up. My father had been a deputy here for 30 years before he retired, and the badge felt like a legacy, a connection to him and to the mother I'd never known. She died in 1952. I know that sounds impossible given that I was born in 1959, but let me explain. My mother, Nadia Marsh, was murdered in October of 1952, 7 years before I was born. She was 23 years old, newly married to my father, and someone killed her on a dirt road outside of town. The case was never solved. My father never talked about it, not really. He'd remarried a few years later to the woman I called Mom growing up, and they'd had me. But sometimes I'd catch him looking at the old photographs, touching the frame of Nadia's picture like he was reaching across time to hold her hand one more time. I grew up with that absence, that ghost of a woman I'd never meet. And maybe that's why I became a cop. To solve the unsolvable, to bring justice to people who'd been forgotten. I just never imagined I'd get the chance to do it for her. It was November 7th, 1993, a Sunday evening. I was at my desk in the sheriff's office working through a stack of paperwork when my dispatch officer, Carol Henderson, called me over the radio. "Sheriff, I'm getting something weird on the emergency line. Can you come up front?" Carol had been working dispatch for 15 years. She didn't rattle easily. If she said something was weird, it was worth checking out. I walked into the dispatch room and found Carol sitting at her console, headphones on, frowning at her equipment. "What have you got?" I asked. "A call came in about 2 minutes ago. Woman's voice asking for help. But the signal..." She adjusted her headphones. "It's not right. It's like she's calling from an old radio, lots of static, and the voice quality is all wrong, too tinny, too distant. Could be someone with a bad cell phone or a CB radio." That's what I thought, but listen to this. She handed me a second pair of headphones and hit the playback button. Static filled my ears, thick and crackling, the kind you'd hear on an AM radio during a storm. Then, underneath it, a voice. Female, young, terrified. "Please, someone help me. I'm at the Morrison Ranch, the old barn on the east property line. He's going to kill me. Please, somebody has to come." More static. Then the voice again, fainter. Please, my name is Catherine Morrison. I'm 16 years old. Please help me." The recording ended. I looked at Carol. When did this come in? 7 minutes ago, I tried to respond, but the line was dead, just static. Did you get a callback number? That's the weird part. Carol pointed to her screen. The system logged it as a coming from... She paused, checking her notes. A rotary phone, landline, from an exchange that doesn't exist anymore. What do you mean, doesn't exist? I mean the prefix, the first 3 digits of the phone number, they're from the old system, before 1960. We switched to the modern system in 61. This exchange hasn't been in use for over 30 years. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Play it again. Carol hit the button. I listened more carefully this time. The static, the voice quality, the way the woman spoke. It wasn't just old equipment. It sounded like something from another era, like listening to a recording from the 40s or 50s. "Catherine Morrison," I said. "I know that name. You do?" I nodded slowly. "There was a case in 1952. Catherine Morrison, 16 years old, disappeared from the Morrison Ranch. They found her body 3 weeks later in a ravine. The case was never solved." Carol went pale. 1952. That's 41 years ago. Yeah. "So, this call, I don't know what this call is," I said. "But I'm going to the Morrison Ranch. Right now." The Morrison Ranch was about 20 miles outside of town, on the edge of county land. The family had sold the property in the 70s, and it had changed hands several times since then. The current owner was a man named Bill Peterson who used it to run cattle. I drove out there in my patrol truck, the call replaying in my mind. It had to be a prank. Someone found an old recording, somehow patched it into our emergency line, thought it would be funny to spook the sheriff's department. But it didn't feel like a prank, it felt real. The sun was setting as I pulled up to the ranch. The main house looked well maintained, but the outbuildings were old, dating back to the original homestead. I spotted the barn Catherine had mentioned, the old one on the east property line, about a quarter mile from the main house. Bill Peterson came out of the house as I parked. "Evening, Sheriff. Something wrong?" "Got a call about this property. Mind if I look around?" "Not at all." "What kind of call?" "Just need to check something out. Won't take long." I walked toward the old barn, Bill trailing behind me, asking questions I didn't answer. The barn was in rough shape, the wood weathered and splitting, the roof sagging. It probably hadn't been used in decades. The door was hanging on rusty hinges. I pushed it open. Inside was dark and musty, filled with old equipment and bales of hay that had gone to rot. I swept my flashlight across the space, not sure what I was looking for. Then I saw it. In the far corner, partially hidden under a collapsed section of wall, was a tarp. Green, military style, the kind they used in the 50s. It was dusty and torn, but it was there. I walked over and carefully lifted it. Underneath were bones. Human bones, partially scattered but clearly from one individual. Small frame, probably female. And next to the bones, a piece of fabric. A dress, rotted and faded, but I could still make out the pattern. Floral print, the style from the early 50s. I stepped back and radioed Carol. "I need state police out here, and the medical examiner. I found remains." Bill Peterson was in the doorway, his face white. "Jesus Christ, who is that?" "I don't know yet," I said. But I did know. I knew in my bones. It was Catherine Morrison. She'd been here all along, in this barn, for 41 years. The state police arrived within an hour, along with the medical examiner from Casper. They cordoned off the barn and began processing the scene. I gave my statement, explained about the call, though I left out the part about it sounding like it was from 1952. That would just make me sound crazy. But as I watched the ME carefully collect the remains, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The call had led me straight to Catherine. 41 years after she died, someone or something had called for help, and I'd found her. I drove back to the office around midnight. Carol was still at her post, looking exhausted. "Did you find something?" she asked. "Remains. The state police are handling it now, but I think it's Catherine Morrison." Carol's eyes widened. "The girl from the call? Yeah? So the call was real? But how? She's been dead for 40 years. "I don't know, Carol, but I want you to pull any old dispatch records we have. See if there were any other unusual calls around that time, in 1952 or after. We don't have records that old. Everything from before 1970 is stored in the county archives if it was even kept at all. Then I'll check the archives tomorrow. In the meantime, if you get another call like that, you find me immediately. I don't care what time it is." I went home to my small house on the edge of town and tried to sleep, but my mind wouldn't settle. I kept hearing Catherine's voice in my head, pleading for help. Help that came 41 years too late. Around 3 a.m., my radio crackled. "Sheriff Marsh?" I grabbed it from my nightstand. "This is Marsh. What's wrong, Carol?" "I got another call, just now. You need to hear this." I was at the station in 10 minutes, still in my sweatpants and an old Academy t-shirt. Carol looked shaken. "Play it," I said. She hit the button, static, thick, crackling static. Then a voice. Male this time, young, panicked. "This is Deputy James Corrigan, badge number 47. I'm at the Blackwell Gorge, mile marker 31 on the Old County Road. I've been shot. I need backup. He's still out there. Please, send help." More static. Then the voice again, weaker. "Tell Nadia I love her. Tell her I tried." The recording ended. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. James Corrigan. Carol looked at me. "You know him?" "He was a deputy in the 50s. Killed in the line of duty in 1952. September, I think. They said he was responding to a call about poachers and got ambushed. His body was found at Blackwell Gorge. Another 1952 case." "Yeah." I looked at the dispatch console like it was a window into the past. He's calling for help, 41 years after he died. "This doesn't make any sense, Sheriff." "I know, but I'm going to Blackwell Gorge. In the middle of the night? If there's evidence there, if there's something that can finally solve his case, I need to find it. I'm coming with you." I didn't argue. I wasn't sure I wanted to be out there alone. Blackwell Gorge was a narrow ravine on the Old County Road, the one that had been replaced by the highway in the 60s. Nobody used it anymore except for the occasional hunter or hiker. It was isolated, surrounded by scrubland and rock formations, the kind of place where you could hide a body and nobody would find it for months. We parked at mile marker 31 and hiked into the gorge with flashlights and a metal detector. The night was cold and still, our breath visible in the air. "What are we looking for?" Carol asked. "I don't know, evidence. Something that was missed in 1952. We searched for over an hour, combing the area where Corrigan's body had been found. The reports said he'd been shot twice, once in the shoulder and once in the chest. The shooter was never identified. The case went cold within a year. I was about to give up when my flashlight caught something wedged between two rocks. A piece of metal, corroded and partially buried. I knelt down and carefully extracted it. A sheriff's badge, tarnished, almost black, but I could still make out the number. James Corrigan's badge. "Carol, look at this." She came over, and I showed her. "That's his badge? But wouldn't they have recovered that with his body?" "You'd think so, but maybe not. Maybe it fell off during the struggle, rolled down here where nobody could see it." I kept digging around the rocks and found something else. A shell casing, then another. 3 in total, all from a .38 caliber revolver. The reports said he was shot by a rifle, I said, studying the casings. But these are from a handgun. Someone was shooting at Corrigan with a .38. Could they have missed that in the original investigation? Maybe. It was 1952. Forensics wasn't what it is now. They might not have looked carefully enough. I bagged the evidence and we drove back to the station. I spent the rest of the night going through the old case files on James Corrigan, comparing them to what we'd found. The official report said he'd been killed by a single rifle shot to the chest, but the shell casing suggested a different story. A .38 revolver, multiple shots. Either he'd been in a firefight or the killer had used a different weapon than reported. And then I found it, in the medical examiner's notes, buried deep in the file. A notation about an inconsistency. The entry wound didn't match a rifle. It was too small, too clean. The ME had noted it, but apparently never followed up. Someone had lied about how James Corrigan died, and I was starting to think I knew who. The only person who'd been at the scene and filed the official report was Sheriff Walter Harrison. He'd been the sheriff in 1952, my father's boss. He'd retired in 1965 and died in 1980. If Harrison had covered up the real circumstances of Corrigan's death, there had to be a reason. And that reason might explain why the call had come through now, 41 years later. I went to the county archives the next morning and pulled every file related to Harrison's tenure as sheriff. It took hours to go through them, but eventually I found something. A complaint filed against Harrison in 1951, a year before Corrigan's death. The complaint was from a woman named Rebecca Marsh, my mother. She'd accused Harrison of harassment, of making unwanted advances, of using his position to intimidate her. The complaint had been dismissed due to lack of evidence. My hands shook as I read the file. My mother had tried to report the sheriff, and a year later, she was dead. And the deputy who might have helped her, James Corrigan, was also dead. I sat there in the dusty archives room, the pieces falling into place. Harrison had killed them both. He'd killed my mother because she'd rejected him, and he'd killed Corrigan because Corrigan knew or was getting too close to the truth. And somehow, 41 years later, they were calling for help. Calling through time, through some impossible crack in reality, asking for justice. I went back to the station and found Carol at her desk. "I need to tell you something," I said, "and you're going to think I'm crazy. After the last 2 days, I'm ready to believe anything." The calls, Catherine Morrison, James Corrigan. They're from 1952. Real calls from the past somehow coming through to our dispatch now. And I think there's going to be more. Carol nodded slowly. "Okay, so what do? We answer them. We solve the cases. We give them the justice they never got. And how exactly do we do that? I don't know yet, but I'm going to figure it out." That night, I went through the old archives again, pulling every unsolved case from 1952. There were 7 in total, including Catherine Morrison and James Corrigan. 5 others, all mysterious, all cold. I made a list, taped it to my office wall. 7 names, 7 people who died without justice, and I waited for the next call. It came 3 days later, at 2:17 a.m. Carol called me at home. "Sheriff, we've got another one." I was at the station in minutes. Carol played the recording, static. Then a voice, elderly, male, frightened. "This is Harold Pitt. I live at 432 Maple Street. Someone broke into my house. I'm hiding in the closet. Please send help. I can hear him searching for me." A long pause filled with static. I think he knows where I am. The recording ended. Harold Pitt, I said. He was killed in a home invasion in 1952. June, I think. They never caught the guy. What do? We go to 432 Maple Street, see what we can find. The house was still standing, now occupied by a family named Rodriguez. I didn't wake them up. Instead, I walked the property, looking for anything unusual. In the backyard, near what would have been the closet Harold mentioned, I found a loose board in the old tool shed. Behind it was a metal box, rusted shut. I brought it back to the station and carefully pried it open. Inside were jewelry, cash, and a driver's license. The license belonged to a man named Robert Mitchell. The address on it was in Colorado. I ran the name through the database. Robert Mitchell had died in 1975 in a car accident. But in 1952, he'd lived in Millbrook County, right next door to Harold Pitt. The jewelry in the box matched the description of items stolen from Harold's house the night he was killed. We'd found the killer. 23 years too late to prosecute him, but we'd found him. I filed the report, officially closing Harold Pitt's case. The family was notified. After 41 years, they finally had answers. And that night, an old man named Martin Pitt, Harold's son, disappeared. He'd been 68 years old, living in a nursing home in Casper. The staff said he'd been sitting in his room watching TV, and when they checked on him an hour later, he was gone. No signs of a struggle, no indication he'd left the building. He simply wasn't there anymore. The police investigated but found nothing. Martin Pitt had vanished without a trace. I sat in my office, staring at the report, and I understood. The calls weren't just from the past, they were connected to the present. When I solved a 1952 case, someone in 1993 disappeared. The balance, past and present, linked together. Save someone then, lose someone now, and I'd just solved my third case. Which meant 3 people in 1993 had paid the price. Catherine Morrison's case solved. Her nephew, the elderly man who'd been searching for answers his whole life, had vanished. James Corrigan's case solved. A distant relative, a woman I'd never met, had disappeared from her home in Denver. Harold Pitt's case solved. His son, gone. I was saving the dead and erasing the living, and there were 4 more cases left. 4 more calls that might come through. 4 more impossible choices. I looked at the dispatch console, at the equipment that had somehow become a telephone line to the past, and I wondered what I was supposed to do. Stop answering the calls? Let the dead remain unsolved? Or keep going, knowing that every answer would cost someone their existence? I didn't have long to decide, because that's when Carol called me over the radio, her voice shaking. "Sheriff, we've got another call, and this one, you need to hear this one right now." I walked into the dispatch room. Carol's face was pale, her hands trembling. "Play it," I said. She hit the button, static, and then a voice I'd only heard in my dreams, imagined from old photographs and my father's stories. A woman's voice, young and terrified. "Please, someone help me. My name is Nadia Marsh. I'm on Old River Road, mile marker 12. Someone's following me. Please, I need help." My mother, calling from 1952, calling to me, her daughter who hadn't been born yet, begging for the help that never came. And I had to decide whether to answer. I stood in the dispatch room, frozen, listening to my mother's voice ask for help that would never arrive. Carol was watching me, her face a mixture of sympathy and horror. "Sheriff?" I couldn't speak, couldn't move. I just listened to the recording again and again, memorizing every word, every inflection, every breath. This was my mother. Not a photograph, not a story, not my father's fading memories. This was her, alive, terrified, begging for someone to save her, and I was that someone, 41 years too late. Finally, Carol turned off the recording. "What do you want to do?" I had to clear my throat. "I need to think. Rebecca, if we solve this case, if we find out what happened to your mother, someone else disappears. The pattern is clear now. Every time you close one of these 1952 cases, someone related to the victim vanishes in 1993. I know. So, if you solve your mother's murder, then I disappear." The words came out flat, emotionless, because if I let myself feel anything, I'd shatter. I'm her daughter, her only child. I'd be the one the balance would take. Carol gripped the edge of her console. "Then we don't solve it. We ignore the call. We let this one go." "I can't do that." "Rebecca, you'd cease to exist. Not die, not disappear, but never have been born at all. Your father, your whole life, everything you've done, it would all be erased." "I know." I looked at her. "But she's my mother, and she's calling for help. How can I ignore that?" "Because you're alive and she's dead. Because there's nothing you can do to change what happened. Because saving her means losing yourself." I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. Carol was right. Every rational part of me knew she was right, but the call played in my head on an endless loop. My mother's voice, young and afraid, asking for help. "I need some time," I said finally. "Don't log this call. Don't tell anyone about it. Just give me some time to figure this out." I left the station and drove aimlessly through the county, watching the sun come up over the high plains. I'd grown up here, in this landscape of endless sky and sparse vegetation. Every rock, every dirt road, every lonely ranch was familiar to me. If I solved my mother's case, would I remember any of this? Would I exist in some other form, some other timeline? Or would I just be gone, like I'd never been born? And what would happen to my father? He'd lost Nadia in 1952. Then he'd remarried, had me, built a new life around his grief. If Nadia was saved, if her killer was caught before she died, would he have married my stepmother? Would I exist at all? The temporal mechanics of it made my head hurt, but the emotional equation was simple. My mother's life versus mine. I found myself at the cemetery where Nadia was buried. I'd been here dozens of times, standing at the gravestone that marked a woman I'd never known. Nadia Elizabeth Marsh, 1929 to 1952. Beloved wife. Taken too soon. I sat down in the grass next to the grave and talked to her. Told her about my life, about becoming sheriff, about finding her murderer after all these years. Told her about the impossible choice I had to make. "I don't know what to do," I said to the cold stone. "Part of me wants to save you so desperately it hurts. But if I do, I erase myself. And I'm not sure I'm brave enough for that." The wind blew across the plains, carrying no answers. My phone rang. Carol. "Sheriff, I think you need to come back to the station, now." "What's wrong?" "Just come, please." I drove back and found Carol in my office, a stack of old newspapers spread across my desk. "I've been going through the archives," she said, "looking for anything about your mother's case, and I found something." She pointed to a newspaper from October 1952. The headline read, "Young woman found dead on Old River Road." I'd read this article before, years ago. It detailed how Nadia Marsh had been found in her car, shot once in the head, no signs of robbery or assault. The investigation had gone nowhere. "I know this story," I said. "What am I looking at?" Not that article, this one." She pointed to a smaller article below it, one I'd never noticed before. "Deputy arrested in connection with harassment complaint." I leaned in and read. Deputy Thomas Reeves had been arrested for harassing a local woman, Nadia Marsh. The charges were filed 2 weeks before her death, but were dropped after she died. The article mentioned that Reeves had been suspended pending investigation. "I never knew about this," I said. "I knew about the complaint against Sheriff Harrison, but not about a deputy being arrested. There's more." Carol pulled out another article, this one from November 1952. "Suspended deputy dies in hunting accident." Thomas Reeves had been found dead in the woods outside of town, apparently killed by a stray bullet during hunting season. The death was ruled accidental. "Do you see it?" Carol asked. "The timeline. Your mother files a complaint against Harrison. Then she files one against Reeves. Then she's murdered. Then Reeves dies in a hunting accident 3 weeks later. You think Harrison killed them both. Killed my mother to shut her up, then killed Reeves to cover his tracks. Or Reeves killed your mother on Harrison's orders, and then Harrison killed Reeves to make sure he'd never talk." I felt sick. Harrison was at my mother's funeral. He gave the eulogy, talked about what a tragedy it was, how he'd do everything in his power to find her killer. And he did find her killer, because it was him. I sat down heavily in my chair. He's dead now. Died in 1980. There's no way to prosecute him, no way to bring him to justice. No. But you can solve the case. You can give your mother the answer she deserves. And erase myself in the process. Carol was quiet for a moment. "Maybe there's another way. Maybe the balance doesn't work exactly how we think it does." "What do you mean?" "Look at the people who disappeared." Catherine Morrison's nephew was 73 years old, lived a full life. James Corrigan's distant relative, same thing. Harold Pitt's son was elderly. They all had their time. Maybe the balance takes people who've lived their lives, not people in their prime. I'm 34. That's not exactly elderly. But you're not blood related to Nadia through her death. You're blood related to her through your father. If Nadia had lived, maybe she and your father would still have had you, just in a different timeline. Maybe you'd still exist, just differently. It was a hope to cling to, but it felt thin. Or maybe I wouldn't exist at all. There's only one way to find out. I stared at the newspaper articles, at the evidence of my mother's killer. After 41 years, I finally knew the truth. Sheriff Walter Harrison had murdered Nadia Marsh, and then he'd covered it up, lived out his career as a respected lawman, and died peacefully in his sleep. The injustice of it burned in my chest, but was justice worth my existence? "I need to talk to my father," I said. I drove to my father's house on the edge of town. He was 72 now, retired for over a decade, spending his days working on his truck and watching old westerns on TV. He'd been a good father, solid and present, but there'd always been a sadness in him, a part of himself he'd never fully given to me or my stepmother, the part that had died with Nadia. I found him in his garage, working under the hood of his pickup. "Hey, kiddo," he said, not looking up. "Thought you had work today." "I do. Just needed to talk to you about something." He straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. "Everything okay?" "No, not really." I took a deep breath. "I need to tell you about some cases I've been working on, and I need to know about Mom, about Nadia." His expression closed down immediately. "Rebecca, I've told you everything I know. It's been 41 years. Let it go." "I can't, because I found something. Evidence that might finally solve her case." He was quiet for a long moment. "What kind of evidence?" I told him everything, the calls from 1952, the cases I'd solved, the pattern of disappearances. I told him about the newspaper articles, about Harrison and Reeves, about the cover-up. When I finished, he sat down on his workbench, suddenly looking older than his years. "Harrison," he said quietly. "I always suspected, but I could never prove it. He was too careful, and I was just a deputy who was going to believe me over the sheriff." "You knew?" "I knew he'd been bothering Nadia. She told me about it, about how uncomfortable he made her feel. I wanted to file a complaint, but she was afraid it would make things worse. And then," he stopped, his voice breaking. "And then she was gone. Why didn't you say anything? To the state police? To someone?" "I tried. I went to the state police, told them I suspected Harrison. They investigated and found nothing. Harrison was too smart. He'd covered his tracks perfectly. And then Reeves died, and any connection to Harrison died with him. So you just lived with it, knowing the man who killed your wife was walking around free. What choice did I have? I had you to think about. Your mother, Helen, God rest her soul, she took you in when she didn't have to. I owed her a life, a family. I couldn't spend it chasing ghosts. I understood, but it still hurt. If you could go back, if you could change what happened to Nadia, would you?" He looked at me, and I saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke. "Every single day. I loved Helen, and I love you, but Nadia she was the first, the one I'd planned my whole life around. Losing her broke something in me that never healed. Even if it meant I might not exist." He was quiet for a long time. Then, "That's not a fair question, Rebecca. I know, but I need you to answer it anyway. If I could save Nadia, if I could have had the life we'd planned together, yes, I would, even knowing what I'd lose." He reached out and gripped my hand. "But that doesn't mean I don't love you. It just means the heart doesn't work on logic. It works on longing." I drove back to the station feeling hollow. My father had given me his answer. If he could save Nadia, he would, even if it meant I'd never been born. Carol was waiting for me. "I've been thinking," she said, "about the calls, about why they're happening now. And what if it's not random? What if there's a reason they're coming through in 1993 specifically?" "What reason?" 1993 is 41 years after 1952. 41. That's a significant number in some cultures. In Jewish tradition, it represents transition, completion. What if the temporal wound is healing? What if these calls are the last chance to set things right? So, I'm supposed to solve my mother's case. That's my purpose. Maybe. Or maybe your purpose is to choose. To decide whether the past should be fixed or whether the present should be preserved. A choice. That's what this came down to. Not destiny, not fate, but a choice. I could solve my mother's case, give her the justice she deserved, and possibly erase myself from existence. Or I could walk away, let her remain unavenged, and preserve my own life. Before I could decide, the radio crackled. Another call. This time, it was brief. Just a few words, spoken by a young woman, before the static cut her off. "Deputy Nadia Reeves, badge 23, officer down. I need..." The transmission ended. Carol and I looked at each other. "Nadia Reeves," I said. "Thomas Reeves' daughter. She became a deputy in the 70s. Worked here for 10 years before transferring to Cheyenne. She's retired now, living in Laramie." "But this call is from 1952? No." I rewound the recording and listened again. The audio quality was different. Not as much static, more modern. "This isn't from 1952, I said slowly. "This is from the future." "What?" "If the calls can come backward in time, why can't they go forward too? This is from sometime after 1993. Nadia Reeves calling for help from our future. That doesn't make any sense. But even as Carol said it, I felt the pieces clicking into place. The temporal wound wasn't just connecting 1952 and 1993. It was connecting multiple points in time, creating a network of calls across the decades. And if Nadia Reeves was calling from the future, that meant something was going to happen to her. Something that would require her to send a message back through time. "We need to find her," I said. "Now." We called Nadia Reeves' home in Laramie. No answer. We called the Laramie Police Department and asked them to do a welfare check. They called back an hour later. "Sheriff Marsh, Nadia Reeves is fine. She was out grocery shopping. We spoke with her at her house. She's confused about why you wanted us to check on her." I felt a wave of relief, followed by confusion. "She's okay?" "Yes, ma'am. Healthy and safe. Thank you. Sorry for the trouble." I hung up and looked at Carol. "She's fine, so why did we get a call from her saying she was down?" Maybe it hasn't happened yet. Maybe it's going to happen in the future, and she's warning us now. Or maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe the stress of the last few weeks, the impossible choices, the temporal paradoxes had finally broken something in me. That night, I went home and tried to sleep, but I couldn't. I kept hearing the calls. Catherine Morrison, James Corrigan, Harold Pitt, Nadia Reeves, and my mother over and over asking for help. At 3 a.m., I gave up and went back to the station. Carol had gone home, but she'd left the recordings queued up for me. I listened to them one by one, trying to find some pattern, some clue about what I was supposed to do. Then I heard it. Something I'd missed before. In the background of my mother's call, underneath the static, there was another sound. Faint, but distinct. A radio playing, and a voice singing along to an old song. I isolated the audio and amplified it. The song was Because of You by Tony Bennett, released in 1951, and the voice singing along was male, deep, familiar. I knew that voice, Sheriff Walter Harrison. He'd been there, in the car with my mother, when she'd made her final call for help. He'd been there, and he'd been the one who'd killed her. The recording was evidence. 41-year-old evidence, but evidence nonetheless. I could release this, let the world know what Harrison had done. His legacy would be destroyed, his name dragged through the mud. It wasn't justice, not really, but it was something. Or I could do more. I could investigate, find out exactly where my mother had been when she'd made that call, find physical evidence that might still exist. I could solve her case completely, and face whatever consequences the balance demanded. I sat in my office, listening to my mother's voice and Harrison singing, and I made my decision. I was going to solve this case, all of it. Harrison, Reeves, the cover-up, everything. And if the balance took me for it, if I ceased to exist, then that was the price. My mother had called for help. And 41 years later, I was going to answer. But first, I had to understand the rules. I had to know exactly what would happen when I solved her case. Because there had to be a way to save her without losing myself. There had to be. I spent the next 2 days researching everything I could about temporal paradoxes, parallel timelines, and the physics of causality. The county library didn't have much, but I drove to the university library in Laramie and found enough to make my head spin. The grandfather paradox, the bootstrap paradox, the butterfly effect. All theoretical, all impossible to prove, but all suggesting the same thing. Changing the past created consequences in the present. But what kind of consequences? That was the question I couldn't answer. On the third day, I drove to Old River Road, mile marker 12, where my mother had made her final call. It was a lonely stretch of two-lane highway, surrounded by scrubland and low hills. Nothing remarkable about it except that this was where she died. I parked at the marker and walked the road, looking for anything that might have survived 41 years. The shoulder was gravel and dirt, eroded by time and weather. The chances of finding physical evidence were essentially zero, but I looked anyway, because I needed to do something. I needed to feel like I was moving forward, even if it was toward my own erasure. I was about to give up when I saw it, a small reflection in the dirt, barely visible. I knelt down and brushed away the soil. A button. Brass, tarnished almost black, but with a distinctive pattern. I'd seen this pattern before in the photographs my father kept. My mother had been wearing a coat with brass buttons the night she died. This was hers. I carefully collected it, along with soil samples from the area, and brought them back to the county office. We didn't have sophisticated forensics equipment, but we had connections to the state crime lab. I sent everything to them with a rush request, calling in every favor I had. While I waited for the results, I kept working the other angles. I pulled Harrison's old service records looking for any connection to Thomas Reeves. I found it in their training records. They'd gone through the academy together, had been friends for years. When Nadia had filed her complaint against Harrison, Reeves had been the one to intimidate her, to make her fear for her safety. Harrison had used his friend to do his dirty work. And when Nadia had been killed, Harrison had investigated the case himself, making sure no evidence pointed to him. Then he'd eliminated the one person who could connect him to the crime, Reeves. It was a perfect cover-up, and it had worked for 41 years. The crime lab called me back 4 days later. "Sheriff Marsh, we've got your results. The button you sent us has traces of blood on it. The soil samples also have blood markers, degraded but present. Without DNA comparison, we can't definitively say whose blood it is, but the presence is confirmed. Can you determine how old it is? That's the interesting part. The degradation pattern suggests the blood is approximately 40 years old, give or take a few years. So this could be from 1952? Absolutely. If you have DNA from a family member, we could try to match it, but I'm not confident we'd get clean results given the degradation. I'm a family member. My mother's blood. Can you test my DNA against it?" There was a pause on the line. "This is your mother's case?" "Yes." "I'm sorry, Sheriff. We'll do everything we can." They expedited the testing. A week later, I had my answer. The blood on the button was a familial match to me. It was my mother's blood. This was the crime scene. This was where Harrison had killed her, shot her while she sat in her car, and then staged it to look like a random killing. With the evidence from the button, the audio recording of Harrison in the car, and the newspaper articles about his connection to Reeves, I had everything I needed to solve the case. I could write the report, file it with the state police, make it official. Nadia Marsh's murder, solved 41 years later. Killer identified as former Sheriff Walter Harrison, deceased, but I didn't file it. Not yet, because I still didn't know what would happen to me when I did. Carol found me in my office late one night, staring at the completed report. "You haven't filed it yet," she said. "No. Why not?" "Because I'm scared." The admission felt both relieving and humiliating. I don't want to stop existing, Carol. I like my life. It's not perfect, but it's mine. I'm not ready to give it up. Then don't walk away from this. Let your mother's case stay cold. I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I hear her voice, asking for help. How do I ignore that? Carol sat down across from me. "Can I tell you something? Something you're not going to want to hear?" "Go ahead." "Your mother is dead. She's been dead for 41 years. Nothing you do now can change that. The woman you'd be saving isn't her, not really. She's an echo, a call from the past. But she's already gone. So I should just let her killer get away with it. He didn't get away with it. He's dead. He can't hurt anyone anymore. But his legacy lives on. People remember him as a good sheriff, a respected man. That's not justice. Maybe not. But you know the truth. I know the truth. Your father knows the truth. Isn't that enough? I wanted to say yes. I wanted to believe that private knowledge was sufficient, that I could live with letting Harrison's public reputation remain intact. But I couldn't. I need to file this report, I said. Not for justice, not even for my mother, but because if I don't, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened, and that wondering will eat me alive. Carol nodded slowly. Then file it. But before you do, there's something else you should know. What? I've been having dreams, ever since the calls started. Dreams about a different life, a different version of this town. And in those dreams, you're not here. I'm working with a different sheriff, a man named Cooper. He's good at his job, but he doesn't care about this place the way you do. And the calls still come, but no one investigates them. They're dismissed as pranks or equipment malfunctions. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe the timeline where you don't exist is worse than the one where you do. Maybe you solving these cases, even at the cost of your own existence, is important. Maybe that's why the calls are coming to you specifically. I hadn't considered that I might be specifically chosen for this, that my existence was somehow tied to the calls. Or maybe I'm just unlucky, I said. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong frequency on the dispatch. Maybe, but I don't think so. That night, I went to my father's house again. He was on the porch, watching the stars, a beer in his hand. "Can I join you?" I asked. "Always." I sat down beside him. For a long time, we didn't speak, just watched the Wyoming sky stretch out forever above us. Finally, I said, "I'm going to file the report. I'm going to solve Mom's case." He took a slow sip of his beer. "I figured you would. I don't know what's going to happen to me when I do. I might disappear, I might cease to exist, or I might be fine, and all of this is just in my head. If you do disappear," he said quietly, "I want you to know something. You've been the best part of my life. You and Helen both. Losing Nadia almost destroyed me, but you two brought me back. You gave me a reason to keep going. Dad, let me finish. If you have to make this choice, if you have to sacrifice yourself to give Nadia justice, I understand, and I'm proud of you. But I also want you to know that you're allowed to choose yourself. You're allowed to want to live. What would you do if you were me?" He thought about it for a long time. "I don't know. I'd want to save Nadia. God, I'd want that so badly. But I'd also want you to exist. And I don't know which one I'd choose. That's not very helpful." He smiled sadly. "I know, but it's honest." I stayed there with him for a few more hours, talking about nothing and everything. When I finally left, I didn't say goodbye. It felt too final. Back at my office, I stared at the report one more time. Then I picked up the phone and called the state police. "This is Sheriff Rebecca Marsh of Millbrook County. I'm calling to report new evidence in a cold case. Case number 1952-147. Nadia Marsh homicide." The state investigator assigned to cold cases called me back the next morning. His name was Detective Frank Morrison, and he sounded skeptical. "Sheriff Marsh, I've reviewed the file you sent. The evidence is circumstantial at best. A 41-year-old button, degraded blood samples, an audio recording that could be interpreted multiple ways. Without Harrison or Reeves alive to question, this case isn't going anywhere legally. I know. But I can still file the report. I can still name Harrison as the primary suspect. You can, but it won't change anything. He's dead. There's no trial, no justice to be served. It'll change the record. People will know what he did. Morrison sighed. Look, I get it. This is your mother. You want answers. But destroying a dead man's reputation based on circumstantial evidence isn't the way to get them. It's not circumstantial. The evidence is solid. Then prove it. Find something concrete, a confession, a witness, something that ties Harrison to the scene definitively. Until then, my hands are tied. He hung up. I sat there, frustrated and angry. The evidence was good, better than most cold cases ever got. But Morrison was right. Without something definitive, it would always be questioned. I needed more. I went back to the archives and pulled every file related to Harrison's tenure as sheriff. I went through his personal papers, his case notes, everything. And I found it. Tucked in the back of a file cabinet in a folder marked Personal was a letter. Handwritten, dated October 1952. It was from Thomas Reeves to Walter Harrison. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not cleaning up your messes. Nadia Marsh was the last one. I'm done. If you come near me or my family, I'll tell everyone what you did. The letter was a confession. Reeves admitting that Harrison had done something to Nadia, that he'd helped cover it up, and that he wanted out. Harrison had kept the letter. Maybe as leverage, maybe as a reminder of his power over Reeves. Whatever the reason, it was here. Evidence that couldn't be explained away. I called Morrison back. I found something. A letter from Reeves to Harrison dated October 1952. It implicates Harrison directly in Nadia Marsh's death. There was a long pause. Can you fax it to me? I'll do better than that. I'm driving to Cheyenne right now. You'll have the original in 3 hours. I made the drive, handed over the letter, and waited while Morrison reviewed it. When he looked up, his expression had changed. This changes things. With this letter, I can reopen the case officially. I can name Harrison as the primary suspect, and I can close it as solved. How long will it take? A few days to process the paperwork. But Sheriff Marsh, I have to ask, why is this so important to you? Your mother is gone. Harrison is gone. What does solving this case accomplish? I thought about all the answers I could give. Justice, truth, closure. But the real answer was simpler. Because she called for help, and I answered. Morrison nodded. Fair enough. I'll get this processed as quickly as possible. I drove back to Millbrook, knowing that in a few days my mother's case would officially be solved, and knowing that when it was, the balance would demand its price. I had 3 days to prepare for the possibility that I might cease to exist. I spent the first day writing letters. To my father, telling him I loved him. To Carol, thanking her for being my friend. To the town, explaining why I'd made this choice. I spent the second day going through my life, organizing documents, making sure everything was in order if I disappeared. On the third day, I went to my mother's grave one last time. I did it, I said to the stone. I solved your case. I found out what happened, who killed you, why. In a few hours, it'll be official. You'll have justice. The wind blew across the cemetery, cool and steady. I don't know what happens next. Maybe I disappear, maybe I don't. But either way, I wanted you to know. Your daughter solved your case. I hope that means something. I sat there for a long time, talking to her about everything and nothing. When the sun started to set, I finally stood up. Goodbye, Mom. I wish I'd known you. I drove back to the station. Carol was waiting for me, along with my father and Deputy Mike Pitt, who'd been with the department for 10 years. Morrison called, Carol said. The case is officially closed. Nadia Marsh's murder solved. Walter Harrison named as the primary suspect. When did he file it? 15 minutes ago. I looked at my hands. Still there. I looked at Carol, at my father, at Mike. They all looked back at me. I'm still here, I said. You are, Carol confirmed. So the balance, it didn't take me? Maybe it works differently than we thought. Or maybe... The dispatch radio crackled. We all turned to look at it. Static. Thick, heavy static. Then a voice. My voice. This is Sheriff Rebecca Marsh, badge 41. I'm at the dispatch center, Millbrook County. Something's wrong. Time is... I can't explain it. If anyone can hear this, please, I need help. More static. Then my voice again, fainter. I think I'm disappearing. The recording ended. I stared at the radio, my heart pounding. That's impossible, I said. I'm right here. I didn't make that call. No, Carol said slowly. You didn't make it yet. And then I understood. The balance hadn't taken me in the past. It was going to take me in the future. The call I'd just heard was from my own future, from a time when solving my mother's case would finally catch up with me. The question was, when? The call from my future self played on repeat in my mind for the next week. Every morning, I woke up wondering if this would be the day I'd start to fade. Every night, I went to sleep wondering if I'd wake up at all. But I remained solid, present, real. Carol started documenting everything. She recorded every moment I was at the station, kept detailed logs of my activities, interviewed me about my memories and perceptions. If I was going to disappear, she wanted evidence that I'd existed. This is insane, I told her one night. I'm still here. Maybe that call was wrong. Maybe it's from a timeline that won't happen. Or maybe it's coming, she said. And we need to be ready. Ready for what? There's nothing we can do if I cease to exist. Maybe there is. Maybe if we understand why it's happening, we can stop it. I'd been thinking about that too. The pattern of the disappearances. The people who'd vanished when I'd solved the 1952 cases. They'd all been blood relatives of the victims. Catherine Morrison's nephew, James Corrigan's cousin, Harold Pitt's son. But my mother's case was solved, and I was still here. What if the balance is cumulative? I said suddenly. What if it's not about one case at a time, but about the total weight of all the cases? Carol looked at me. Meaning? I've solved 4 cases. 4 people disappeared. But maybe the balance didn't take me immediately because it's waiting, building up. And when it reaches a certain threshold, then I disappear. How many cases would that be? I don't know. But there were 7 unsolved 1952 cases total. I've solved 4. Maybe when I solve the last 3, that's when it happens. So don't solve the last 3 cases. But what if more calls come through? What if people need help? Rebecca, you can't save everyone, especially not at the cost of your own existence. But even as she said it, we both knew I would try. The next call came 2 weeks later. It was 3 a.m. when my phone rang. Carol, her voice tight with stress. Another one. You need to hear this. I was at the station in minutes. The recording was already queued up. Static, then a child's voice. Young, maybe 10 years old, terrified. My name is Emma Price. I'm at the old Waverly School. There's a man here. He hurt my teacher. Please send help. The transmission ended. I knew this case. Emma Price had disappeared in 1952 from the Waverly School, an old one-room schoolhouse that had been abandoned in the 40s. Her body was found a week later. The killer was never caught. This is number 5, Carol said. If your theory is right, you've got 2 more before... I know. So, what do you do? I looked at the dispatch console, at the equipment that had become a portal through time. I thought about Emma Price. a 10-year-old girl who'd called for help that never came. I solve it. The Waverly School still stood, barely. It was on county land, too remote and worthless to bother demolishing. Over the years, it had become a dump site for old equipment and trash. I spent 3 days searching the property, sifting through decades of accumulated junk. On the 4th day, I found something in the old coal room. A locket, small and tarnished. I pried it open and found a tiny photograph inside. Emma Price. There was also a name engraved on the back. R. Hendricks. I ran the name through old records. Robert Hendricks, a handyman who'd worked odd jobs around the county in the 50s. He'd disappeared in 1953, a year after Emma's death. Left town suddenly, no forwarding address. I tracked his descendants and found a grandson living in Denver. I called him and explained that I was investigating an old case, that his grandfather's name had come up. "Look, my grandfather wasn't a good man," the grandson said. "Before he died in '89, he told me things about a girl, about what he'd done. I thought he was just confused, senile, but he seemed so sure." "What did he say?" "He said he'd killed a child. Back in Wyoming in 1952. Said it had been an accident, that he'd panicked and hidden the body. Said it had haunted him his whole life." A deathbed confession. Not legally admissible, but enough for me to close the case. I wrote up the report and sent it to the state police. Morrison called me back within an hour. "That's 5 cold cases solved, Sheriff. You're on a hell of a roll." "Yeah, you okay? You sound off." "I'm fine, just tired." "Well, take some time off. You've earned it." I hung up and waited for something to happen. For me to start fading, to feel the pull of non-existence. But I remained solid. "2 more, Carol said. "You've got 2 more cases before you hit 7. Maybe 7 isn't the magic number. Maybe I'm overthinking this. Or maybe you've got 2 more chances to walk away." The 6th call came a month later. This time it was an adult male, his voice calm despite the circumstances. "This is Dr. Michael Wright. I'm at St. Mary's Hospital. Someone's in my office. They have a gun. I'm hiding in the supply closet. Please, send someone." Dr. Michael Wright had been killed in 1952 at St. Mary's Hospital during what was ruled a robbery gone wrong. The killer had never been identified. The old St. Mary's building was still standing, converted into county offices in the 70s. I had access to the entire structure. I searched for 2 weeks and found it in the basement archives. A gun hidden behind a false wall panel wrapped in cloth. A .38 revolver, the same caliber that had killed Dr. Wright. Ballistics matched it to the murder weapon. The serial number traced back to a man named Leonard Crow, a hospital orderly who'd worked at St. Mary's in 1952. He'd died in 1970. Case number 6. Solved. I sent the report to Morrison and waited. Still nothing. I remained. Carol was baffled. "This doesn't make sense. According to your theory, you should be gone by now. Maybe the theory's wrong, or maybe there's something we're not understanding about the balance." My father stopped by the station that evening. He'd aged visibly over the past few months, the stress of watching his daughter potentially erase herself taking its toll. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Fine, still here." "Rebecca, I've been thinking about all of this. About the calls, about the balance, about what it means. And what if it's not about punishment? What if the balance is trying to tell you something? Like what? You've solved 6 cases. 6 people who died without justice. And 6 of their descendants vanished from 1993, but you're still here even though you solved your mother's case. So maybe you're not supposed to disappear. Maybe you're protected because you're the one doing the work, the witness, the solver. Then why did I get a call from my future self saying I was disappearing? I don't know, but maybe that's a timeline that won't happen now. Maybe by continuing to solve cases, you've changed your own future. It was a hope to cling to, but I wasn't sure I believed it. The 7th call came on a cold night in February, 3 months after I'd solved Emma Price's case. I was home, trying to sleep, when my radio crackled. Carol's voice shaking. "Sheriff, you need to come in, right now." "What is it?" "Just come." I drove to the station and found Carol standing outside the dispatch room, her face pale. "I can't go in there," she said. "You need to hear it alone." "Carol, what are you talking about?" "Just go, you'll understand." I walked into the dispatch room and hit the playback button. Static. Then a voice I knew better than my own. My mother's voice, but different, older, tired. "This is Nadia Marsh. I'm 70 years old. It's October 2011. If my daughter Rebecca can hear this, I need her to know something. I need her to know that I lived, that her father and I had a beautiful life together, that she has 2 younger brothers, and they're wonderful men. I need her to know that she made the right choice." A pause, static. "But I also need her to understand the cost. Because of the balance, because she saved me in 1952, someone else paid the price. Her friend Carol. Carol Henderson, who would have been born in 1959, never existed in this timeline. Neither did Deputy Mike Pitt. Neither did dozens of other people whose lives were connected to those cases. My hands started shaking. The balance doesn't just take one person, Rebecca. It takes everyone connected to them. Ripples spreading out through time, erasing people who should have existed. And the only reason you can hear this message is because I'm using the same temporal frequency that connected us in the first place. The same frequency that started all of this. Another pause. I don't regret living. I got to raise my children, love my husband, see my grandchildren. But I need you to know what it cost, and I need you to decide if it was worth it. The message ended. I stood there, frozen. My mother had lived. In some timeline, some version of reality, I'd solved her case before she died, and she'd lived a full life. But in that timeline, Carol had never existed. Mike had never existed. How many others? I walked out of the dispatch room. Carol was waiting. "Did you hear it?" I asked. "Hear what?" "The message. From my mother. About you never existing in her timeline." Carol frowned. "Rebecca, I didn't hear any message. The recording was blank, just static." I went back and played it again. Carol was right. It was just static. The message had been for me alone. A private communication from a mother I'd saved in a timeline I'd never entered. I sank into a chair, trying to process it all. "What did you hear?" Carol asked. I told her everything. About my mother living, about the ripple effect, about Carol and Mike and others never existing in that timeline. When I finished, Carol was quiet for a long time. "So, in the timeline where you saved your mother, I was never born." "Yes. But in this timeline, I exist. Which means you didn't save her." "Right. So, somewhere out there are multiple timelines. One where you solved all 7 cases and saved your mother, but I don't exist. One where you're here now, and I exist, but your mother died. Maybe dozens of variations, all branching off from your choices. That's what I think. So, which one is real? I don't know. Maybe all of them, maybe none of them." Carol sat down beside me. "What are you going to do?" I thought about it. About my mother's voice, old and tired, telling me she'd lived. About Carol, and Mike, and all the people who existed in this timeline but not in that one. About the impossible math of lives saved and lives erased. "I'm going to stop," I said. "I've solved 6 cases, that's enough. I'm not solving the 7th. "There's still one left? One more 1952 case?" "Yes, but I'm not touching it. I'm walking away." "You're sure?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." We sat there in the dispatch room, surrounded by equipment that could connect to other times, other realities, other versions of ourselves. And we didn't say anything else. There was nothing else to say. It's been 5 years since that night. I'm still the sheriff of Millbrook County. Carol is still my dispatch officer. My father is still alive, though he's slowing down. The calls stopped after I heard my mother's message. The dispatch hasn't received a single transmission from 1952 since then. Sometimes I wonder about that 7th case. Who it was, what happened to them, whether they're still waiting for help that will never come. And sometimes I wonder about the other timelines. The one where my mother lived, the one where I ceased to exist, the ones where different choices created different realities. But mostly, I try to be present in this timeline, this reality, the one where I'm here, where Carol exists, where my father still misses Nadia but also has me. Last week I got a call from the state police. "Detective Morrison, Sheriff Marsh, I wanted to let you know that cold case you solved, Nadia Marsh. It's being featured in a national database, 6 cold cases from 1952, all solved by the same investigator. You're getting recognition for this." "I don't want recognition." "Too bad. You've got it. You've done something remarkable here. Given families closure, given victims justice. After I hung up, I thought about what justice means. Is it justice if solving the case erases someone else? Is it closure if the price is another person's existence? I don't have answers. I just have choices. And I chose this timeline, with all its imperfections and tragedies. My mother died in 1952. That's a fact I can't change without destroying the reality I'm living in. But 6 other families got answers. 6 other cases got solved. 6 other victims got justice. Maybe that's enough. Or maybe it's not. Either way, I'm still here. Still sheriff, still answering calls. Just not the ones from 1952. Those calls are silent now, and I plan to keep them that way. Last night, I went to my mother's grave again. I do that sometimes, just to talk to her, to tell her about my life. "I could have saved you," I said to the stone. "In another timeline, I did. You lived to be 70, had 3 children, saw your grandchildren, but in that timeline, people I care about never existed. So I chose this one. I chose the timeline where you died, but they lived." The wind blew across the cemetery, carrying the smell of rain. I hope you understand. I hope wherever you are, whatever version of you exists across all the possible timelines, you understand why I made that choice. I stood there for a while longer, then turned to leave. As I walked back to my truck, my radio crackled. "Sheriff Marsh? This is Marsh. This is dispatch. We've got a situation on Old River Road, mile marker 12. Caller says she's being followed. Female, sounds young, scared. She gave her name as..." Carol's voice caught. "She said her name is Nadia Marsh." I stopped walking. "Sheriff, are you there?" I looked back at my mother's grave, then at the radio in my hand. The calls weren't over. They were just beginning again, and I had to decide one more time whether to answer.